Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Imran to present his talk entitled Trans-Oceanic Connection Through the Historical Mosques of Maritime Southeast Asia.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So good morning everyone, and thank you for coming to my talk this morning. Let me just adjust a few things before we begin. All right. First of all, I would like to thank the Islamic Arts Museum of Malaysia, especially Naila and Marina, for this kind invitation. Now, I was asked to discuss the mosque architecture of Maritime Southeast Asia through the lens of the current exhibition, Oceans That Speak. And so then, of course, I jumped at the opportunity because this is a topic that is very close to what I am most interested in, and that is the kind of dynamic between connections across regions, but also connections within the region. So the region that we're talking about is Maritime Southeast Asia, which is incredibly diverse and also encompasses complex translocal interactions and connections. And of course, I put these three images on the slide cover for a reason. I think most of us are very aware that IMM has a beautiful set of mosque models, right, from around the world. Somewhat away from that room full of beautiful crafted models are three models of Southeast Asian, mosques that are shown here, these three. I don't know whether you've noticed that. So they are located a little bit away from the main space. Right now you only see two of them because one of them has been taken to the Oceans That Speak exhibition. And these three are Masjid Tengkara in Melaka, Masjid Kampung Laut in Nilampuri near Kota Baru, Kelantan. It's been relocated back to Kampung Laut. Yeah, it was in Nilampuri for quite a while. It's been relocated back to its original site, Kampung Laut, near Kota Baru, Kelantan. And then the one at the far right, that is Masjid Teluk Manuk in the Patani region, southern Thailand today. But Patani, of course, as you know, is formerly a Malay-speaking sultanate. Yeah? So just comparing these three, we can already see the diverse forms and details in the mosque architecture of just these locations on the peninsula. Right? And of course, we could go on to talk about other sites, as we will very soon. But my focus today is to try and talk about broader questions on the connections as well as the translations from these connections, starting with these three, using these three as starting points. But I'm going to do a bit of a sleight of hand because I would like to talk about, as our MC earlier introduced me with, the longue durée, meaning we try to understand the topic from a slightly longer duration of time. The time frame is important so that we understand how it leads up to something that we see in a particular moment in time. And this, of course, it becomes very important when discussing our first starting point, Melaka. Before I do that, I just want to explain why I put those two dates. I heard that some people got a bit confused about what those meant. So those are just an acknowledgement of previous presentations, which are slightly different from this, but with elements that you will hear again. I think most people would have forgotten by now if they were there in 2019, here in the IIM auditorium, as well as in Melaka. So I've spoken, it's quite different from this presentation, but there are elements in there. So in case some of you were in those presentations, you will see echoes of it here and there in today's presentation. I said I will start with Melaka, but you will notice, of course, I put a mosque from quite far away, isn't it? Luwu in South Sulawesi. I'll explain very soon. But one of the things that really, to me, shows, highlights, brings to our attention very keenly the lacuna in our understanding of the mosque architecture of the region has to do with our lack of, our total lack of any information worthy of reconstructing the mosque form of the Sultanate of Malacca's mosque. You know, we don't know what it looks like. There are no images, nothing. What we do know though, and this is something that I've already talked about before in Malacca in 2019 itself, in Malacca itself in 2019, is, and this is something forgotten until, I think since then, I see a lot of people talking about this, which is good because I think it has brought attention to this point made by Gaspar Correa, the secretary to Albuquerque, who mentioned that the Mosque of Malacca Sultanate was built of stone cubes, and it had to be dismantled by this number of paid men, and the mosque stones, as well as those from smaller buildings and tombstones, were reused. Yeah? They were repurposed for the fortress, and this fortress, some have conjectured, should be Alfa Musa, the tower, not the fortification that we see remnants of today, not the, for example, the Santiago Gate, but a completely dismantled tower building. And so that brings to mind the question, if it was built of stone, exactly what form could it take? And that's where I juxtapose it with the Palopo Mosque, which is unfortunately, as you can see, from 1604. That's rather late, isn't it? But what's important about South Sulawesi is the link, this translocal, or if you like, maybe is it trans-regional? Is it far enough to be another region? Or is it within our region? Anyway, if you think it's within our region, then we call it translocal. Yeah? Connection from South Sulawesi, the Bugis region, and the Straits of Malacca, both sides. Both the Minangkabaus, who were very heavily involved actually in Malacca as well, together with the Javanese in Sultanate Malacca, as well as Malacca itself. Yeah? And people who brought the proselytizers of Islam, Muslim proselytizers of the Bugis region, both in Luwu, quite far north of in South Sulawesi, as well as in Makassar, were part of this trio of Minangkabau Datus, who were religious leaders, who were called collectively Datu Ritiro, the three Datus, Minangkabau Datus. What's interesting, of course, is the mosque is contains elements that comes from Minangkabau structure. It has a single column in the center, which is the form that characterizes Minangkabau mosque as opposed to Javanese and Malay mosque. The single column in the center reaching right to the apex of the roof. So that's a Minangkabau feature inside, because you can see in this photo. And the walls, you might be able to just about make out that they are made of stone cubes. So very similar to what the description is saying. It may well have been somewhat akin to this form, perhaps larger, we do not know. But this is one possibility. Yeah? And of course, we also have, I put there the image of the Makara discovered in Malacca, because it's so important to think about Malacca's pre-Islamic legacies. So the stone building tradition for Chandis would have, it seems, would have been in Malacca before the conversion. And then, of course, you have the Islamic stone artifacts. Yeah? In this case, it has to do with, as we recall, the conversion of the ruler of Malacca to Islam was via Pasai in North Sumatra. Yeah? So the Pasai, as well as Aceh, were the production centers of the well-renowned Batu Aceh gravestone tradition. And the one on the right has been hewn to a shape that was then usable for the fort. It was rediscovered at the hill in 1918. So comparing it with a full form. So these are some of the questions that we can then continue to ask in relation to other somewhat neglected legacies of Malacca. For example, this Datuk Manila tomb in Tengkera, with this form, you know. So it's actually taking after a tiered roof wooden structure, of course entirely built in stone and plastered. So this is a big question. It's not even included in the UNESCO, you know, it's kind of neglected outside. Yeah. And then you have this series of gravestones attributed to Hang Tuah, to Hang Kasturi, to Hang Jebat. Well, we don't really know. I mean, it's kind of popular naming, But what is important though is the fact that these are in the old wards of Malacca Sultanate, Kampung Keling, Kampung Jawa, and so on. So these therefore point to the possibility of what Gaspar Correa was talking about, the stone construction of the tombs. And they seem to take the same set of vocabulary, formal vocabulary. Okay? And there are telltale signs that either in the Sultanate period or later, it seems Tamil Muslims would have been involved, because, I say Tamil Muslims because these niches for light are a feature of the Muslim architecture of the Tamil coast. Yeah? And of course we know that in Malacca there was a period of contestation between a Tamil Muslim line and a Malay line in the Sultanate, yeah, if you recall. So this, and of course the Javanese were also in great numbers, so we'll talk a little bit about that later. So what we're talking therefore about in the case of Malacca is this convergence of number of multiple number of connections that Malacca had. That is that is the tower that I'm talking about. Also in the commentaries by the Bukat, we have description of the tombs, the old tombs of Malacca being reused as the material. So the kind of remnant tombs from beyond the royal hill that we see here and here may well provide us some clues as to the possible construction. So those examples are from this area here. Yeah? So of course the royal hill is here, this one. And we're talking about tombs that exist within the urban fabric here. I'm pointing to the fact that the stone mosque of Sultanate Malacca would have stood here, where the fort was built. So the fort was built on the side of the mosque, which is here on this map, next to the Stadthaus. And unfortunately, the Surah Warisan, which is, I think, not a very good replica, is built somewhat next to it. So, you know, there's this missed opportunity to address the possible site and so on. So I think there's some possibility to rethink this in future. And I mentioned quite a fair bit about the connections of Malacca. We are continuing to look at the condition that is shared by Malacca with other port cities around the region, because I think it's not so, it doesn't suit our purpose to talk about the Trans-Oceanic and Trans-Local without expanding beyond present-day national boundaries. Right? So we want to look at just the area around the Straits of Malacca, and two close major neighbors of Malacca slightly later were Aceh and Banten. And what does the evidence from Aceh and Banten tell us? So Aceh is in northern Sumatra, right, the northern tip, next to Pasai, and Banten is in West Java, next to Jakarta. Actually, Jayakarta, or Sunda Kelapa, the old name, was a minor satellite port of the Sultanate of Banten. When the Dutch took over, they competed with Banten and eventually prevailed over Banten. And so today, nobody remembers Banten. And everybody remembers or knows Jakarta. It's somewhat like the story of Malacca and Port Kelang, maybe, I don't know. I mean, not parallel, but Port Kelang is not a capital. But what I mean is similar. Yeah? So Banten was the major international port of the region alongside Aceh and Brunei after Malacca was conquered by the Portuguese. So many of the Muslim traders, as we know through our common historiography, right, relocated their bases to Aceh, to Banten, to Makassar, to Brunei, and so on. So that's the comparison here is, of course, with a slightly later period, but you see, the 1600s, this is too late for our Malacca Sultanate period. Banten is also around the 1600s. Now, so you can see the stone construction quite prominently depicted here, for instance. Yeah? A kind of two-tiered stone base, crenellated at the edges, as you would expect from a fortress. And Anthony Reid has spoken of this as a kind of, he wants to give it a name. So he labels this a fortress mosque. Yeah? So according to Reid, you can think of it as a fortress mosque. And in the case of Banten, we can look at two examples. Banten Kasunyatan is a suburb, also built in around in the same period as the Banten Sultanate 17th century main mosque. It's actually older, Kasunyatan, and so then it's older than the Royal Mosque. And so then you can see the elements in brick as well as plaster work in these two examples, which in some ways recall the examples that you see in Malacca. So this was a prevalent practice, but also the key elements within this complex points to multiple connections. So the Tiamah building, the madrasa or library here, is well known to have been built by a Dutchman who went into this, converted and came into under the service of the Sultan of Banten. The minaret is interesting because, as you can see, it somewhat resembles a lighthouse in profile. That's what people have often said. But notice this element at the top, the mustaka, which is used in Javanese as well as some of the Sumatran and Malay mosques, like in Palembang as well as in Malacca. So you recognize this from Malacca Mosque as well. Not that it is from Malacca, but it is common across Java, Malacca, Palembang, these three places. I want to say then, therefore, it seems to have a Javanese, specifically Javanese connection, because both Malacca and Palembang have a heavy Javanese component in their population. And in the case of Palembang, it is in fact the dynasty itself that is Javanese, Central Javanese to be precise. So this seems to be a Javanese affiliated feature, which is different from, say, the finial that you see on Kampung Laut Mosque in Kelantan. And in addition to the finial, right, which is quite important, you also have the plinth, these decorative elements like a dado, as well as these brick openings and these ornaments at the base. And the most important of all, I think, is if you were to look at the doorway on this side, you will see the doorway frame in the Kala Makara form of Javanese Buddhist and Hindu complexes. So you see in one monument like this, a minaret, so many different reference, in particular Javanese reference made for a new form like this, which has a spiral staircase, but it uses the kind of brick ornament recess as well as brick ornament omission for openings that you see in earlier Chandi work. So the kind of Chandi work that you can see, I'm just using a short form, the kind of construction in stone that we would have seen in Chandis, the plinth, the antefixes, these triangular bits that you see sticking out, all of these elements, there are even antefixes on the gravestone of Batu Aceh form itself here. And the fact that they are circulating across the Muslim world. So first of all, Aceh itself translated these forms that were formerly used for Chandis, right, but now repurposed for Islamic use. And it traveled across the region. In fact, more recent studies have shown that quite a number of the Banten in West Java, Banten examples of Batu Aceh were locally produced, modeled after Batu Aceh from Pasai. So some would have been imported, but many others were actually manufactured in Banten by local artisans who modeled the Batu Aceh after the example in Pasai and Aceh. So it's the local Banten version. So this kind of translation and recombination in the new context of, or in the separate and distinct context of Banten. You will also notice this very elaborate gateway with all the plinths that you would have found totally in keeping with the structure of Chandis before. So I'm saying all this, of course, to point to us the possibility that the Mosque of Malacca may have had similar. Do you remember the Datuk Manila tomb complex? Yeah, that's the structure with all the plinths and the reticulated sides like this. So this may have been the kind of model that Malacca's stone mosque followed. And in fact, a place like Pasai, where Islam, which was more or less, you could say, responsible for the conversion of Malacca's Sultan, right? Malacca's ruler into Islam and became a Sultan. A place like Pasai also extensively reworked elements from various sources, not just Chandis, but quite prominent is the Chandi element. Right? The idea of a plinth, the idea of the antefixes, and the idea of even the finial, like a stupika, the kind of finial that you find on temples. All these completely repurposed with elements from Islamic calligraphy, from, for example, these kinds of ornaments have been identified to be quite common to the somewhat sinicized Persian ornamental tradition. So you've got so many different sources that go into the stone work of Batu Aceh. Yeah? You've got an element that has been asserted, people have asserted that this particular burlesque ornament, it's called a bungong Aceh, Achenese flower, is a particularly local element, for example. So many different attributions and assertions to something like this, yeah? The plethora of different Batu Aceh forms. Yeah? And of course, it is not just in Aceh, Banten, Melaka, also in a place as distant, relatively speaking, as Makassar, the Bugis region. So there, therefore, is a specific selection or specific network that we're talking about. These are not just diffuse, like like maybe a blot of ink on tissue. It goes just by nature. It was quite purposive and went through specific agents. So tracing those agencies remains the key operative challenge of writing a proper history of this, properly historicizing. So what I'm saying, therefore, is not to see this as a kind of natural diffusion of styles, but to then ask questions about why is it that these are the specific spots, yeah, in the region, the maritime region, where these developments took place. Of course, you would recognize this as somewhat cognate to, but distinct from, the kind of plinth bases to the Batu Aceh gravestones of Banten. So in Goa and in Talok, this is Goa, but equally in the gravesite of Talok, which I didn't pluck out the images for. These are, in Talok is almost the same. Goa and Talok are the twin kingdoms that united to form the port Negeri of Makassar. So it's a Goa and Talok alliance. Both of the sites have these kinds of tall plinths with Batu Aceh on top. Many of these have to be restudied in light of the fact that we do know that there is also local production of Batu Aceh types resembling but quite differentiated from those produced in Pasai. So not just Banten, Makassar as well did the same. So all in all, we can therefore speak of a vocabulary, a shared vocabulary across the maritime region that nevertheless, so not only became a canon of sorts, right? Everybody wanted to use the same form, produced and initiated actually in Pasai. And even this is being questioned. Maybe Pasai borrowed elements from elsewhere. Maybe the market, destination market, determined the forms they wanted. We don't know. We don't have enough evidence. But we do know that this became therefore the model of gravestones in a variety of places. We are quite well acquainted with the work of the late Othman Yatim, right, who studied the Batu Aceh of the peninsula. So that also brings up the question, how much of these were imported from Aceh, how much may have been locally produced in the various sites in the peninsula. Yeah? So that also, yeah, brings to mind looking at the connectedness of sites, maritime sites in the region, not to see them as isolated monuments, but to see them within the network of the polity itself, the port capital and harbour town networks itself, as well as connections beyond that locality. So for example, a case like Banten has a suburb, as I mentioned earlier, Kasunyatan, where you get this mosque and minaret, which is in fact older than the royal mosque in the capital proper. Yeah. So Kasunyatan would be something like going to, let me see, maybe you can say either Melaka Pindah or one of the sites further upstream, right? Maybe not so far, I don't know. Or Bertam or something like that compared to Melaka. A site further upstream, which is considered a satellite. In fact, Sunya, as you know from Sanskrit, means what is Sunya? Absent, right? The void. So Kasunyatan is in fact an interesting translation in linguistic terms as well. It's used for, it's Muslim Sufi center, right? So the idea of isolation from society or withdrawal to a separate site. And the use of a Sanskrit term to refer to this practice in Islamic terms. So Kasunyatan here is referring to the place to be still, right? To withdraw from the center, the capital itself. So Kasunyatan has the older mosque, and it also has this magnificent pool, the only surviving pool in this form in Banten. It has not been dated. We don't know exactly what year it was built, but looking at the construction, it may well be 17th century, coinciding with some of the other structures, such as the pool that I showed earlier, this one, Banten Lama Royal Pool. So all these have yet to be firmly dated. We have rough conjectures based on maps, but we don't have exact dates for the structures. But these kinds of structures really tell us about the translation as well as the connections across places. Reason being, so for example, you look at the ornamentation on the mosque, some of these ornamentation are local, and some of them refer to, but seem to be local translations of, ornaments that you would find, as I mentioned, in let's say Malabar or Tamil Nadu. The kind of plasterwork ornamentation that you see here, as well as in the Royal Mosque of Banten. And then last but not least, one of the questions raised by this Mehrdad Shukuhi, who writes about Malabar and Makbar, coastal Kerala and coastal Tamil Nadu, the Muslim sultanates there, and the mosques built by these Muslim sultanates, is the possibility, and this is not conclusive, of cross connections and links between. I think I didn't choose the most convincing example. This is Kasunyatan. You can look at other examples around Banten where it more closely resembles this particular mihrab arch. So the point that Mehrdad Shukuhi was making is not to say that therefore this example from Banten is from Malabar, but to ask about the possibility of cross influences, because the mosque form is entirely different in Malabar and in Banten. This is actually a ridge limas or hip roof rather than a pyramidal hip. So it's not pyramidal in form like this, right? It is a hip roof with a ridge on top. So it's a different mosque form. And actually there are also very distinct differences between the mihrab frame of the two places. But the similarities drew Mehrdad Shukuhi to question the possibility of connections. Either way, these seem to allude to the earlier Kalamakara arch that we saw at the base of Banten Royal Mosque's minaret. So there are all these translations from the Indic or the pre-Islamic Buddhist and Hindu architecture of both Java, Sumatra, the Malay Peninsula, and in India, in southern India, as well as the ornamentation that was then elaborated for mosques in an independent fashion. So this may have its starting point in allusions to the Kalamakara portal, but it has taken a life of its own. In fact, I have also heard some people even questioning whether this is even a Kalamakara. Okay, I mean, for me, it is quite obvious that this is meant to be in a position that reminds us of Kalamakara frame, but there you go. So you've got other examples of this, the Kalamakara frame. This is in Hindu Javanese art and Buddhist Javanese monuments, this will be a Bhuta Kala, for example. But the Bhuta Kala is replaced here by the sunburst motif of the Majapahit kingdom. Yeah? So the Majapahit sunburst motif here, and then of course the Makara completely abstracted as scroll form rather than an actual Makara mouth. And the lotus bud and so on. So this is quite a well-known example. Some of you familiar with the scholarship would know this is Chirapon. One of the most remarkable examples of the mihrab niche with a Kalamakara arch. And you will see echoes of this later in, okay, I removed it, but you will see echoes of this if you go to Kampung Laut Mimbar, or if you go to Langgar, Masjid Langgar in Kota Baru as well. Not exactly the same, but what the Kelantanese in their more recent scholarship call Gunungan, this arch, they call it Gunungan, is akin to the kind of arch that you find at the top of this kind of Kalamakara arch. Okay. And also other stonework examples here. Here is an example of the use of this kind of, what in Kelantan is called Gunungan, this kind of frame. This kind of frame in a slightly different form is seen in Kelantan and called Gunungan, and how it is actually also connected back to the Kalamakara arch that you see here.